Okay, the recording is on. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Melissa Potvin. I am your CA Community Manager. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day for joining our presentation, Trust in Your APIs with Runscope. I'm very happy to introduce you to John Benbow and Sam Abar with the Runscope team here today, and they will deliver to you a presentation that should last about an hour. Of course, we plan to open for questions at the end. You will have an opportunity to ask live questions. I'll give you instructions at the end on how to unmute your line to do that. In the meanwhile, during the presentation, you can ask questions through the Q&A panel or through the chat panel on the right side of your WebEx screen. So without further ado, I'd like to pass to John. Go ahead, John.
Thank you, Melissa. And as Melissa said, welcome everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name's John Benbow, and myself and Sam Abar will be presenting today, and I'll be running through the value of Runscope, and then Sam will do a demonstration of the product to show you just how easy it is to use to build robust monitors for your APIs. So trust in your APIs with Runscope. Your business relies on your app, and your app relies on APIs. The application economy is evolving to the API economy. APIs are the applications. APIs are no longer just technical mechanisms for application integration. When companies expose their back-end systems via APIs, the APIs become revenue and partnership generating opportunities. With rapid adoption of microservices architecture, the number of private and public APIs will proliferate rapidly. Monitoring APIs effectively and efficiently has become the most indispensable capability in an API economy. What is the API economy? The API economy consists of APIs, which are the building blocks of applications. Companies all over the world are exposing their back-end systems as APIs, providing potential opportunities to grow revenue and partnerships. We know that in the application economy, every business is a software business. But what does that mean? It means that there are more API touch points than ever before. This is good news. It means more opportunities to impress the user, gain loyalty, and increase top-line revenue. However, it also means that there is more pressure than ever before to provide a quality user experience. End users don't care how complex the application is, they just expect it to work. A good place to start the conversation in building a case for API monitoring is by highlighting the growing importance of APIs within application and digital transformation strategies. You see here that experts from a wide range of respected sources have recognized that APIs live at the heart of an organization's digital strategy. As Gartner analysts write in their 2017 report, Top 10 Things CIOs Need to Know About APIs and the API Economy, APIs make digital society and digital business work. They are the basis of every digital strategy. In today's application economy, every business is a digital business, connected by applications and APIs. Retail, news, entertainment, banking, education, government, communications, everything is driven by a connected, mobile, application-based world, and customers have come to expect companies to deliver optimized software offering fast, easy access to products, services, and information. In support of this evolution, analysts predicted that half of all collaboration between business occurred through APIs in 2016. We know who the unicorns are, the massively successful startups that took root in the digital environment and built their business almost entirely around software and APIs. Consider that Uber, the world's largest transportation company of its kind, owns no vehicles. Airbnb, the world's largest accommodation provider, owns no real estate. And Facebook, the world's most popular media owner, creates no content. The only real asset of these companies is software. And it's not just the unicorns. Industrial horses with long histories stretching out before the digital age are also leveraging software and APIs to extend and expand the reach and competitive advantage of their business. such as FedEx, which has both embraced the app to streamline its services and expanded into self-service lockers and other new business lines. Tesco, the large EU retailer, which has created innovative click-and-collect service that allows shoppers to order goods in advance and pick them up at a drive-through. And USAA, which is engaged in a wholesale agile transformation to become a leading innovator as one of the first FSIs to adopt biometric voice and facial authentication for its services. By Q2 last year, over 100,000 members signed up, with 4 out of 5 preferring it over PIN or password. Old, new, large or small, every organization is leaping into the API economy, and participation is no longer optional. An API failure is an application failure. When APIs break, connections break, great experiences turn sour, and revenue is lost. All companies today rely heavily on APIs, but recently API outages have been making headlines. Connections break. We start with Facebook, which has a user base of 1.5 million people or thereabouts, so any disruption of service is bound to make headlines. And recently, Facebook confirmed their Messenger app went down, and in a statement they said sending and receiving messages may not work. Facebook is just one of many social media companies that experienced an API outage. Twitter and Instagram, among others, have suffered API outages, which caused apps to go down and connections to break. Great experiences turn sour. Tesla has long been on the forefront of innovation. Far beyond the car manufacturing industry, they provide a great experience for their customers. In this case, they had a mobile app that allowed users to remote start and unlock their cars, but when the API failed, users could no longer access these features for their mobile app. In addition, the United States Census Bureau opened a public API for app developers in hopes that it would make data more accessible and improve the experience of the public by enabling developers to leverage the data in new and innovative ways. But the API recently experienced an outage. Apps connecting to the API were unable to retrieve data, and users were locked out of the applications for over 3 hours. And they issued an apology to their developer community on Twitter. USPS also experienced an outage on their e-commerce tracking API during the holiday season. Retailers were unable to track packages or receive confirmation when a package was delivered. Revenue is lost. In the worst case scenario, an API outage can directly affect revenue. Bitcoin trading platforms suffered API outages. Coinbase, along with other exchanges, were impacted by this outage. The outage affected Bitcoin prices as trading was halted for some users, and the fewer people that transact, the less revenue these exchanges bring in. Amazon also experienced outages with their APIs. Being the retail giant that it is, any amount of downtime can significantly impact their bottom line and the bottom line of the companies that rely on Amazon's APIs. Although these stories are very public, API outages can occur at organizations of any size across any industry. If you have an app that relies on APIs, you need to monitor it so that you're aware of the outages before your customers are. Now let's take a look at what happens when no one is monitoring APIs. First, the API fails, then the applications relying on the API fails, which impacts user experience. Search for API outage on Twitter and you'll see a stream of discussions happening every day from small to large organizations that are suffering from an API outage. People will be vocal when the experience doesn't meet their expectations. Next, your DevOps team will scramble to find root cause and eventually isolate the issue to the API. But by then, the damage has been done. Your brand reputation may be tarnished, and it can directly impact your revenue. Most applications now have hundreds of APIs, making remediation time consuming. When even one API is down, so is your business. That's why you need to constantly monitor your APIs and the third-party APIs your apps rely on. With Runscope, you can catch API failures before your customers do, understand when third-party APIs go down and how they affect app performance, ensure service-level agreements are met for your APIs or the APIs you depend on, monitor API performance around the world, and verify that APIs are returning the right data. Runscope is a flexible and easy-to-use SaaS-first solution, and over 1,000 customers depend on Runscope for API monitoring today. A DevOps approach for API monitoring. The needs of Mike in the development team and Jane in the operations team are very much the same when it comes to API monitoring. They need to ensure that the APIs they use that are developed in-house or by third parties are up and running, performant, and have payloads that are delivering the correct data. To ensure that APIs are working as expected, API developers need to validate that APIs are performing well and returning the right data early in the software delivery lifecycle, and those tests need to be maintained and optimized in production by IT operations. Runscope supports these needs very well by supporting APIs that can be shared easily across different environments. Developers can create API monitoring tests in their development environment for their own APIs and the third-party APIs on which they rely. Operations can then use these to monitor APIs in production and can create their own tests to address production issues and share those with development. This ensures your customers have an exceptional user experience, which translates into better outcomes for your business. API monitoring by Runscope is focused on 3 core fundamentals: uptime monitoring, performance measurement, and data integrity. Uptime monitoring. Be the first to know when an API is down. Catch the problem before support tickets start cropping up. Performance measurement. Get visibility into API performance so you can stay ahead of intermittent problems that could cause outages. Data integrity. Ensure that the structure and content of your API calls are returning the data that you and your customers expect. If an API you use is not functioning correctly, there is an impact to your business's bottom line. Using Runscope, you can quickly set up continuous monitors to gain visibility into your API problems. This enables you to identify and solve problems before there is any significant impact to your business. Service level agreements to your customers are important. You need to ensure that you are providing your customers the uptime as defined in your SLA. Equally, you need to ensure that APIs you use are meeting the agreed SLAs. Runscope enables you to quickly define a monitor for your API and schedule it to run. You can then quickly define an email notification or integration to products such as PagerDuty or Slack to be notified if there is a problem with the APIs you rely on, so you can act before there's an impact to your customers or your business. Monitor API performance around the world. Runscope enables you to get a clear understanding of the API access from an API user perspective by running different monitors from different world locations. You can select from up to 16 locations across 8 countries. Runscope keeps you up to date with any API performance issues for the APIs you're monitoring. You can view graphs showing you the API success rate and response time over time, as well as receive notifications. You not only need to ensure that APIs are up and performing, you need to ensure the data you are expecting is what is in the API payload. Runscope enables you to set up data validation against APIs very quickly, supporting many types of assertions without any coding. You can also do very complex validation and exploit pre- and post scripting if you want to. The Runscope Radar agent bridges Runscope to private APIs, not available over the public internet. By running the agent within your infrastructure, Runscope API monitors and tests can run against endpoints that are otherwise inaccessible to cloud agents. Trust in your APIs with Runscope. Be the first to know when an API is down or slow. Monitor third-party APIs for uptime and performance. Ensure SLAs are being met. Achieve a global view of API performance. Verify your API payloads are returning the correct data. Solve API problems as a team and improve collaboration among developers and operations. All of this resulting in less downtime, fewer support tickets, and faster time to resolution. Get started with Runscope in less than 5 minutes. Sign up for a free trial at runscope.com. Okay, so that deck's to show you the value, and I hope you now understand the value of Runscope. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Sam, who's going to do a demonstration of Runscope and show you how quickly you can get value out of the Runscope solution. Over to you, Sam.
Great. Thanks so much, John, and thanks, Melissa. Just guess first wanted to confirm that everyone can see my screen.
I can.
Super. Thanks, Melissa, and thanks everyone for taking the time to join this webinar today. So John has just walked us through the ubiquity of APIs and the importance of monitoring APIs and how Runscope can help you do this. As John said, I'm going to show you how easy it is to monitor your APIs with Runscope. While I'm speaking, please feel free to put any questions you have in the Q&A box in the WebEx, or else you can ask them live at the end of the demonstration. I'm here on the Runscope dashboard, and we're going to create a new test today. We're going to be working with an API that simulates a deck of cards. So imagine you were building an application that was a card game, and you were using this API on the back end. And Runscope can help you, as John said, make sure that your API is up, fast, and accurate. So the first thing we do is we give this test a name, and we go ahead and click Create Test. And we're now in the user interface for a new test to build a monitor to track this API. I'm going to go ahead, the endpoint for this API, the first thing we would do is we might shuffle a deck of cards. And so I'm just going to grab the endpoint here. And I can simply paste it into this endpoint box. A couple of things to highlight quickly. First of all, while this is a GET request, Runscope supports any of the methods that are available for API. If we had any authentication or headers that we needed to add, we could do that as well. You'll note here that the query string has been parsed out, so rather than having to modify it in the URL, you could modify it here. If you had additional URL parameters that you wanted to add, you could do that as well, and you'd see that it would fill them in accordingly. The second thing we want to do is make sure that we're asserting against the response that we're going to get. And so, again, we're helping you make sure your API is up, fast, and accurate. So, we're first got an assertion for a status code of 200, which is an OK response code. We can also assert about a variety of other things. So response time, is our response fast? So let's just make sure that we've got a response time of less than 500 milliseconds. And then we can also assert about the data that we're getting back. In this case, this API returns JSON, but if we had an API that returns text or XML, we can handle that as well. In this case, having looked at the documentation for the API, I can see that I expect a response that has these 4 properties. I'm going to focus on 2 of them. One is the number of cards that are remaining, and 2 is this unique deck ID property. So going back to our test, what we can do is we can, again, specify which property we want. So for the remaining property, we want to make sure there are 52 cards remaining. And for the deck ID property, in this case, since it's unique every time, we don't have a specific value we're looking for, but we just want to make sure it's not empty. With that done, we now have a very bare bones basic structure for a monitor for this endpoint, and I can go ahead and run this in individual time. We can see this test run going over here, and when it completes, I can click through on this and see the results. And so the first thing we can see at the top line is that all 4 of our assertions were met. We can drill down on this a little further to see the details of the request we actually made with the headers and the response as well, including all of the headers that came back and the body. Okay. The next step is we're going to make this test a little more complicated. So I'm going to go ahead and edit the test. And oftentimes when you're working with APIs, it's not just about making a single step. It's about making a request, taking data from that step, and using it in a subsequent request. And again, with Runscope, we make that very easy to do. So I'm going to go ahead and add a second step here. So it's going to be another request. And if I look at my API, what I want to do next is I want to draw cards from the deck. So this is the request that one makes to draw cards from a deck. And you'll notice here that we're going to need to use that unique deck ID to specify what deck we want to draw cards from. Now, obviously, each time we run that test, that deck ID property, the value of it is going to change. We make this very easy to handle in Runscope by allowing you to assign variables to data that comes back in your response. So in the first step, we're going to go ahead and we're going to assign a variable, in this case, to the deck ID property. Again, we can look and see exactly what our response looked like before in case we'd forgotten the name of the property, and we can see here deck ID is the property we want. We can then give that variable a name to refer to in subsequent steps in our test. We'll just call it deck ID for simplicity's sake. And now I can go down to the second step, and I can fill in my variable here. And in Runscope, the way we do that is with the double curly braces and then the name of the variable with then double closing curly braces. So we've now identified the request we want to make here. And again, we can add assertions. So we want to make sure, again, that our response time is fast. So let's say less than 500 milliseconds. And in this case, we want to make assertions about the number of remaining cards. Since we're drawing 2 cards, we want to make sure it's 50 cards. Now, if we look back at the response that we're expecting to get here, we can see that, if we're drawing 2 cards, we should be getting an array back where we're expecting these, properties for the 2 cards. So in this case, we should be getting, let's say we want to make sure that we're in fact getting 2 codes for cards. So we can add those assertions in as well. So again, in that case, what we could do is we could add a JSON body assertion. And again, we're looking for the cards and then codes. So since it's an array, we can address the array like that. And again, we'll be looking for them not to be empty. And like so. So we can now go ahead and save and run this test, and if I've done everything correctly, we should hopefully get a passing test. And again, sure enough, the test is passed. We can see here, again, each of our assertions that were made. You'll notice that we've assigned a deck ID variable this value for this run of the test. If we were to run the test again, we'd see a different result for that. We'll see that in a second here. And again, when we look at the response we got, we can see, again, the details of that and see, each time that we have, the code property is filled in, so our application will be able, we know our application will be able to run properly. Okay. Now that we've got the framework for this test built, the next thing to do is actually to turn it into a monitor, right? We're not just going to individually run this. We want this to run on a schedule. So we can go ahead here and click Schedules. Go ahead and click Add a Schedule, and we can set it to run with whatever frequency we want. We'll talk about environments in just a moment. So let's say I want to go ahead and run this test every minute. I've now created a schedule where this test is going to run every minute, and then we can set up to be notified when this test fails. So let's talk about how one can get notifications and things like that. And that leads us to this concept of environment. Within Runscope, we can have test level settings that we can create that can be used in a variety of different ways. So the first thing that I want to highlight is this ability to send notifications. So we could set up to send a notification when a test fails. So if this test were to fail, I would receive a notification. I could specify which members of my team I want to get notifications. I could specify the conditions under which I wanted them to get notifications. We also have a number of different integrations that you can use with Runscope. So if you don't want to get email notifications, we have services like PagerDuty and Slack and a whole number of other different services that you can use to get notified when your test runs or when your test fails. If the integrations we have are not the ones you want, we also have the ability to send webhook notifications. So you can make post requests after the test runs or on a test failure to a URL that you specify. Let's talk a little bit more about environments. Environments also allow you to create one test that you can run in different environments of yours. So let's look at this example test we have. We've explicitly named the endpoint that we're accessing. And so imagine this is our production URL. But perhaps we also have a QA environment that we want to do testing in, monitoring in as well. And the way we can do that is rather than explicitly putting the URL, we can use a variable there. And what I can do is in my environment, I can assign a value to that variable. So we can have a variable called base URL, and for the base URL, we can fill in this value. And we'll call this environment production. And then in each step in my test, rather than explicitly referencing the URL, what we can do is we can reference it with its variable. And so now when I run this test, you'll see here that I've now renamed the environment production, so we can see that environment name for this test. And we can see that in each step, it's filled in that base URL. Now, if I go back and edit this test, I can show you how easy it is then to run this test in a different environment. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this production environment, and I'm going to call this one QA. And let's imagine that the URL for this is, qa.deckofcardsapi.com. That URL doesn't really exist, so this test is going to fail when I run it, but it will still demonstrate how it works. And so you can see here's the example of our QA test, and you can see that it's filled in the qa.deckofcardsapi.com because that's what we specified for the variable. We could have other properties that we included variables for that could, change the way our test functions in those different environments. The notifications we have are set on a per environment basis. So again, it just makes it very easy to, create a monitor to monitor your APIs across your various environments. The last thing I wanted to highlight here is just a couple of the more advanced features. I won't dive deeply into them, but I do want to talk about them for a moment because they really give you flexibility with your testing. For each step in your test, we have the ability to run pre-request and post-response scripts. So essentially what this allows you to do is to use JavaScript to either modify the data you have or do more complex assertions. For example, in this test where we have, where we're drawing 2 cards from a deck of cards, maybe we would want to make sure that that those cards were different than each other because, right, in theory, if you had 2 cards that were coming back the same from a single deck of cards, that would indicate there's some problem with your API. That's not the kind of assertion you could do through the UI, but you could do that using scripting. So it really gives you a ton of flexibility. The very last thing I want to highlight is that Runscope has a robust API. So if you are a more sophisticated user who wants to do things kind of on a more bulk basis programmatically, rather than working through the UI to create, modify, run your tests, you could use the Runscope API to do that. So with that, that's really what I had to present today. We'd love to open it to your questions now.
Thank you, Sam. Great presentation. Thank you, John. Okay, let's open for questions. If there are any, you would need to hit #6 or #6 to unmute your line to ask either John or Sam a question. I'll pause for a minute. John and Sam, nothing in the Q&A panel at the moment. No questions, John and Sam? I'll give it another few seconds. And I'm not seeing anything in the chat or Q&A at this time. Okay, so since there are no questions, what I would like to say is that this presentation was recorded. so you can certainly share with colleagues if you'd like. Stay close to the community where the presentation will be posted. I would like to invite you to the APM community to pay attention to additional events. We're obviously running many events through the community all the time, including roadmap sessions. CA.com roadmap to register for any of those. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day for joining myself and Sam and John here today. Keep the conversation going. If you have any questions about Runscope, you can ask those questions or start discussions within the community. We're always within the community and paying attention. So thank you so much, everyone, for taking time out of your day, and we hope to see you soon. Sam and John, you can disconnect. Thank you, everyone.